Well, good morning and welcome to another week of Journey with Christ. I'm your host, Mark Mitchell, a preaching minister at the Park Avenue Church of Christ in Charleston, West Virginia. And as usual, I'm joined by Steve Fox, a preaching minister for over 50 years. How's it going today, buddy?
It's going pretty good. You okay?
I'm fine.
Sometimes
Hour number 2.
And then we'll do 3 and 4 tomorrow.
No. For those of you who don't remember, this one here has been recorded 2 weeks in advance because I can't do the next one or a week in advance. And
we've gotten to the point where we're so good at this. Next time we're going to study Jesus wept. And I'll take the first part and you take the second part.
You take Jesus. I'll take wept.
Okay. But we're going through another chapter where there's a whole lot of symbolism and enemies and bad people and good people, and just trying to identify all of them is tough.
Yeah, and it's like we've talked about. You have to keep in mind the overall context in which a couple times was said in Revelation chapter 17. You have two sides. You need to pick the right side. And we've got a hint here in several times. Jesus wins. Though it doesn't always look like he's winning. That's the part that frustrates us. Because it's like you said on our last video that we want things always to be perfect. We don't want to be going through a pandemic. We don't want to be going through hard times. We don't want to be going through where people are mad at everybody. We want peace and hope and joy.
Economical chaos.
The chaos that permeates everywhere we go.
Yeah.
I mean, drive down the road now. I mean, you're going to get a horn. You might get some finger gestures. I mean, we live in a world who's just constantly...
we're number one?
Yeah, we're number one.
Yeah, that's what I thought you...
A version of it, anyway. But, we live in a world where there is just a lot of self-indulgence. A lot. Mm-hmm. And creates problems that we're living through.
And Babylon the harlot is puffed up with that idea.
Yes.
We are the important ones in the world. Everybody else is inferior.
Yep. And as 17 brought it out for us, it's very seductive to be seduced by those elements, because when you're scared, you're liable to hold on to anything just so that you're not scared anymore. Mm-hmm. And these people in this period of time, they had every reason in the world to be scared, because they were dying for their faith. They were being burned, crucified, eaten, beaten, killed, stabbed, any way you want to call their death. It was happening to these people. A lot. Well, this week we're going to be in Revelation chapter 18, and I'm going to be... Do you want to read?
I'll read. I'll be happy to read.
All right, you go ahead and read.
18:1. After this I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his splendor. Let me interrupt myself for a minute here. Notice from this point on, from 18 through the end, how many things come down out of heaven.
Yeah.
That some people say that's heaven. But there's going to be a whole lot of things come down out of heaven to the earth.
Mm-hmm.
The earth was made bright with his splendor, and he called out with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. It has become a dwelling place of demons, a haunt of every foul spirit." Boy, there's a nice place to go on vacation.
Yeah. Book me.
"A haunt of every foul and hateful bird, for all the nations have drunk the wine of her impure passion. And the kings of the earth..." Hey, there's the kings of the earth again.
Yeah.
"The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich with the wealth of her wantonness. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, 'Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her, as she herself has rendered, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double drought for her in the cup she mixed. In other words, she was going to get the same punishment she was giving out to everybody. She glorified herself and played the wanton, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning. Since in her heart she says, a queen I sit, I am no widow, mourning I shall never see, so shall her plagues come in a single day, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she shall be burned with fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her. And the kings of the earth...
Let's stop there.
Let's stop. I had to read one more verse.
Oh.
And the kings of the earth... There. That's
okay. Well, we're going to have the kings of the earth again, so...
Yep, we are.
Again, we go back to this analogy of what is this prostitute? What is the purpose behind this? What is the function of this prostitute? Why is this prostitute even relevant? It's because it seduces people to follow her into places of torment, of death, it seems like it's a road, the brick road to, follow the yellow brick road. It will be all great. But as you're going down it, you just slowly but surely, unbeknownst to you, that's what sin is. I mean, and God is proclaiming, you want to see what this ends up being? Here it is. Let me tell you what this will lead to. And how, when it happens, you're going to know.
And they could have had no greater news than what he says in verse 2.
Fallen.
Babylon is fallen. Whether that's Jerusalem or Rome, the point is the same. Babylon is fallen. She used to be totally against you. You didn't want to be near her. She used to be totally against you, and he called, isn't this a lovely description of somebody? It's become a dwelling place of demons and every foul spirit.
Yeah.
Boy. And so the greatest news that they could receive is that identification, whoever that is, has fallen, and he won't bother you again. And she won't bother you again.
Yeah. And everything that this woman produces, and everything that ends up being because of the wine of her adulteries, the merchants who grew rich from her excessive luxuries, the profit that came about, but none of this ends up mattering at all. In God's economy, there is this idea that we think riches are the things that we grab hold of that we can see. But Jesus has told us from the very beginning that what you can't see is the things you should be trying to attain. Those qualities, those fruits of the Spirit, those elements that have value and have meaning in the big perspective. And God is one of those elements that God is that unseen thing that we desperately need to pursue and seek out after, because this other stuff that we see, it's going away, and it does fall.
Susie and I were watching TV the other day when that woman won, was it $1 billion in the lottery?
Yes.
In the lottery, and Susie said, "I wonder how long she'll be happy."
Yeah.
Because lots of people that win the lottery end up just having tragic lives because they grab a hold of that and they think that's what's going to make them happy. But it's not.
Actually, there's a TV show.
And those of us who make very little money can say that. It's not going to make us happy.
Well, actually, there's a TV show out now that's called The Curse of the Lottery.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh. Good enough.
That takes the people throughout history who have won the lottery and shows what happens to them. And in fact, it's almost it's rare for someone who wins the lottery to end up having any kind of life when it's all said and done. Because they chase after everything that the harlot presents and she takes everything, because she takes more than the money away from them. She takes their joy. She takes their peace. She takes their hope.
We had a gentleman here in Cross Lanes about 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Went through the same thing, won all that money. Of course, he already had a lot of money, but he won all that money, and after that,
destroyed his
his
whole
life
family.
was just miserable. Everything that could happen to you happened to him.
He lost his children, his wife. He lost it all.
Of course, when you start out with $1 million in a briefcase stuck in a garbage dump, in a trash bin, there's a story right there for you.
Especially where the trash bin was. So now we're down to verse 9. So you want to keep on reading? You want me to read?
Go ahead.
When the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her. Terrified at her torment, they will stand far off and cry, "Woe, woe to you, great city, you mighty city of Babylon! In 1 hour your doom has come." The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen, pearls, silk, and scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind made of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble. Cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense, myrrh and frankincense, of wine and olive oil, of fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and carriage, and human beings sold as slaves. They will say, "The fruit you longed for is gone from you. All your luxury and splendor have vanished, never to be recovered." The merchants who sold these things gained their wealth from her will stand far off, terrified at her torment. They will weep and mourn and cry out, "Woe, woe to you, great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, and glittering with gold, precious stones and pearls. In 1 hour such great wealth has been brought to ruin." I'm going to stop there. But
Twice he said that in 1 hour it's going to happen.
and here's the thing. It's amazing for me what is noticed that is destroyed. The value of everything is destroyed. All this stuff, the linens, the stones, the pearls, the food, the cargoes of spices and wine and flour and cattle, horses, even human beings sold as slaves, everything is destroyed as far as, and they have, now the merchants, they're trying to figure out what's going to happen to them. You know, what are we going to do? And they're just amazed that what could happen in 1 hour. I know that none of our audience, and you and I either one, lived during the Great Depression. But when the stock market did what it did in the few days that it did it, there were many peoples who's lost everything. My family, my grandfather's father, who had oil and gas in Lincoln County, was part of his stuff. He'd taken a lot of the money that he had gotten over the oil and gas rights that he'd had on his property and put it in the stock market, and lost it.
Well, there were people.
And it was all gone.
There were people so helpless and didn't think they had any kind of a future at all because of the Depression. Jumped out of the windows, killed themselves.
When the value of things that you've esteemed as worth the value you gave them, when they lose that value,
Say that again.
all of a sudden, you don't know where your value is. You've lost it. Because we've all got this in our head, this standard. I mean, everybody has an idea of what it takes to make them happy. And generally, it's items that they have: a home, a nice job, a good car, a good family, well-behaved kids. I mean, they got the list, and it's real popular list, a lot of people on it have the same things on it. And those things that have value are taken away. What do you put in its place?
And that's why Jesus continually talked about, don't worry about what you've got here.
That's right.
Lay up treasures for yourself in heaven.
Yeah.
Because nobody can do anything to those. But they can. I heard a guy say one time, the church is what you have left after your building burns down.
Yeah. And
if you start thinking about how important
it's
your building is, and brick and mortar and plywood.
Well, you could even take that better too. After they've all died and gone to where they're going, that's really what you've got, is the soul that lives in them is the value that's the value God gives to us.
What shall a man profit?
Gain the whole world
and lose his own soul. We're good at that. We ought to go on tour.
We ought to work on this. We got an act going now. But in our world, and just the same world, because you can't tell me that America and Rome, there's not a bunch of similarities between them. I mean, it's scary.
What's the book, the classic book that his name was Gibbon? He wrote the Rise and Fall
of Rome?
Of Rome. I mean, I've never read it, but how many times in the newspaper have I read where people compared what we're going through right now with what Rome went through to destroy themselves?
Yeah, they started off as idyllic, and then everything turned to greed, power, and self-indulgence.
And it so often happens in a country. Some rebels will
prosperity is a dangerous thing.
The rebels will take over and they become rich, and then guess what? The rebels become more corrupt than the people they overtook.
Yep, and they end up being defeated too, because...
Well, you and I should be a part of the United Nations.
Yeah, we'd solve it all.
We could solve all these problems.
But I just want to remind our listeners to remember, we are choosing, so let's choose wisely. Choose wisely. Verse 17. Every sea captain and all who travel by ship, the sailors and all who earn their living from the sea will stand off. When they see the smoke of her burning, they will exclaim, was there ever a city like this great city? They will throw dust on their heads and with weeping and mourning cry out, woe, woe to you, great city, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour she has been brought to ruin. Rejoice over her, you heavens. Rejoice, you people of God. Rejoice, apostles and prophets, for God has judged her with the judgment she imposed on you. Again, just a part of the same thing we just had in the first part of those verses. But there is the point which is kind of hard, because God tells us many times to not be happy when judgment comes. But here's one of the few times where he says to you, rejoice because of the judgment that has just happened to this terrible place. Which is kind of hard for me.
Yeah.
Or to at least keep it in the context.
Well, I think the main context is saying you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
If you're where you're supposed to be and obeying who you're supposed to obey, you don't have to worry about judgment. Now, if you're not doing that, judgment's going to be pretty scary.
Judgment is going to be extremely scary, and the fact is too, all this that has come about would be it would be difficult even to watch. I mean, I've seen people whose lives they have absolutely destroyed, and you watch the day of reckoning for all the things that they've done in their lives, whether it be gambling or drug addiction or alcoholism, greed, or a father who never spent time with his family because he was so enamored by jobs and careers, who one day who dies all by himself because there's no children around who even like him anymore. all those things come with a reckoning. And it's, again, I come to myself, I get the context is God's judgment is final. It's just still hard to kind of like say.
And he uses that word about 6 or 7 times here in this chapter.
Yeah, rejoice.
No, I mean the word judgment.
Oh, yes. Well, it's your turn to read.
Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, so shall Babylon, the great city, there you have to decide again, Jerusalem or Rome, be thrown down with violence and shall be found no more. Wrap a huge big rock around your neck and
throw you
into the water. And the sound of harpers and minstrels, here's some music that's being played. The sound of harpers and minstrels, of flute players and trumpeters shall be heard in thee no more. In other words, that those instruments represented gaiety, joyful happiness.
The music is done.
The music is done?
The music is done. No more partying.
I thought you were talking to me.
No.
I thought you were saying my music that I read was done. I didn't know how it was done. You're right. There's not going to be any good times anymore.
Yeah.
No parties. And craftsmen...
Elvis has left the building. You're welcome.
Shall be heard in thee no more, and a craftsman of any craft shall be found in thee no more. In other words, the economy is going to be messed up too.
Yeah.
The sound of the millstone shall be heard in thee no more, and the light of a lamp shall shine in thee no more, and the voice of a bridegroom and a bride shall be heard in thee no more. In other words, there won't be parties, there won't be marriage, there won't be given in marriage. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, and all nations were deceived by thy sorcery. That sounds like Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And in her, you can read Matthew 23 to find out more about this. Matthew 23 and 24 addresses this judgment. And in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints, and all of who have been slain on the earth.
Mm.
It's a lot of material in a little short time.
Well, chapter 18 is a declaration of what this looks like in that moment, you know, and be prepared to, I mean, here for a good portion of this chapter, these guys have gone from be prepared. We have the letters to the churches, talking about Jesus telling them, hey, this is where you're on, this is where you're not, and this is what I got against you. And then we get into this narrative where the judgments are laid out. What's going to happen? What's it look like? Who are the players and everything? And then we have this scene which says, this is what it's going to look like when I'm done.
And it's going to happen fast.
And it's going to happen.
1 hour.
1 hour.
Well, it just means a short period of
It
time.
means a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
And again, I bring up the fact that we don't think that happens like that. I think of the stock market where the entire United States changed in 1 hour. I think of when Pearl Harbor was bombed. I mean, we weren't in World War II, and then Pearl Harbor happened, and then, okay, we're in it now. Mm-hmm. All that changed in a matter of a few moments. And, of course, now, we weren't destroyed, but bombs can be hurled from heaven, and it's amazing what they would be able to accomplish in an hour.
Yep.
What do you think about this? In her was found the blood of prophets and of God's holy people.
Well, like I said, right from the very beginning, when you decide, because of your previous reading, do I think this is Jerusalem or do I think this is Rome? Jerusalem obviously killed some of their own people, killed some of their own prophets. Mm-hmm. But Rome was the one who in the first century was really... You didn't want any Romans around you at all because you didn't have any idea who was going to think you're worthless and kill you or think you're important. So, again, that goes back to I can't decide which one of the, and maybe they're both. Maybe they're both all the way through here, I don't know.
Well, a good point to bring up is the fact that,
But it's somebody who's killing prophets and saints.
well, the serpent is, the dragon, or the serpent, is described as these are his players. You know, they operate. And as we very much know, part of those grouping that you did a while ago with the 10 kings kind of demonstrates that they were under the fold of the harlot, operating with her, and which would have killed the prophets.
They're the bad guys.
They're the bad guys, and would have participated, and in God's reckoning here, lumps them with the people that they totally despised. So you get the same judgment because you adulterated yourself to this harlot. How many times did in Isaiah, in Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Hosea, all these prophets who come out and say, quit adulterating yourself with these nations? And they wouldn't listen. They would not listen. It's up to you. Do you want to move on to 19, or do you have anything we want to share on 18?
I think we've done enough damage for one day.
Okay.
I was just looking through here and I thought maybe, I know we co-host this meeting that we have once a week, but I thought maybe when we got done with Revelation we could go ahead and study the maps.
That's all that's left in the book.
That's all.
Well, I'm going to have to change my format because I'm going to have to give up my tablet because I don't have maps on my tablet.
Stephen Wright said he had a map of the United States that was to scale.
Mm-hmm.
It took him one whole summer to fold it up and put it in his glove compartment.
Well, it can be at scale. It's just what scale.
Yeah.
If it's 1-to-1, okay.
Yeah.
Well, as we end this segment of this week's show of Journey with Christ, we encourage you to stay positive, even though a lot of the things that we're talking about seem kind of overwhelming and discouraging. But you understand, part of this story that we keep reminding ourselves of is that Jesus triumphs. And that though the world around us may seem like it's falling all around us, we do not allow ourselves to be sucked in to its idea of right and wrong, important and not important. We stick to what God has intended for us through His Son Jesus. Anything you'd like to add before we close it?
What basically we've talked about for the last two meetings that we've had is that God keeps saying, you trust in me and I'll make it work out okay.
Yeah.
Now, I don't have that kind of patience. Hardly anybody has that kind of
No.
patience. We want everything to
struggle
happen.
with it.
Yeah, we struggle with, let's let that happen now. Because most of the time we're discussing things that are negative.
Yeah.
Disease and death and stuff like that.
But there's a lot of positives in our lives, too.
There are. So he keeps saying, hold on, because I'm going to make this work out okay. And that's the basis of our faith. Do we really believe him? Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. Do I believe when I read Revelation that God's going to take care of this, that God's going to fix it, when obviously we can't?
That's right.
And part of that is just throwing up your hands and say, God, we know we can't fix this. And this epidemic is, just imagine years from now what people will say when they write history books and say, what did that virus thing do to the world?
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to even contemplate the danger, the damage that's done. But we still have to hold on to something, and the something that we hold on to is faith in God, where he says, I wrote this book, I've read the ending, I know how it ends up.
I've got it.
I've got it.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in, and on behalf of Steve and I, we encourage you to have a great week, and God bless. I guess we can wave again over here. Hey! See you next week.
His